Please be seated. So, this morning, we heard a lot about light. We heard a lot about sight. We heard a lot about darkness. And we heard this fascinating story. And it is a story that it's hard to talk about. Because I think it's more of a story about time. About then and now. About before and after. About years ago and now. Always and suddenly. It's what happens or what happened in the in-between. There was a moment, you say. There was this thing that happened. There was this person I met. There was this thing I saw. They touched you, mud and light. And the rest is a song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Have you ever noticed that amazing grace, when it passes over us, always leaves an indelible mark? I think it's because we become changed. We become changed forever. We become different. The then and now, the before and after. What I believed years ago, what I believe now. And then we're tasked with, how do we explain our newness? Our new life, our new sight. Some things, some miracles, maybe all miracles, cannot be fully explained. We can only describe them. Tell people what we know about them, how we've been changed, how we're different, what we believe about it. Proof and explanation have a place in the scientific world, yes, but in this passage, not so much. As I said before, this passage is about time. The then and now, the before and after. Who we were for a few years, maybe lots of years, and who we are now. The moment of conversion is not as important as the difference that it makes. Right? I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. For me, this happened in the summer of after my first year of seminary, when I went back to Portsmouth, Virginia, to do some field education, and I was driving up and I stopped at a corner and I looked to the right, and on that corner was one of these Liberty tax services. You know, we see them. There's a couple around here. We see Statue of Liberty standing out there, or George Washington, or Ben Franklin, or Abraham Lincoln. We've all seen that, right? Well, on this day, all four of those were standing out front, just waving and having a good old time. And all four of the people who were in these costumes were African Americans. And that was my conversion point. That was a conversion point for me. Because not the irony of the fact that four African Americans were in costumes of our founding fathers, but something came to me, and that was that, Gary, that's the only opportunity we've given them. Now, I'm not saying the right or wrongness of that. I'm saying that's how it affected me. And so that's a conversion point. Then and now, before and after, years ago and today. I have a friend who was born blind, and he has taught me the foolishness of pity. He neither wants it nor feels he deserves it. But no doubt, to live in a sighted world, he has had to adapt to that. And the challenge for us is whether or not we also let him teach us Are we willing to be taught? Are we willing to enter the blindness of what we don't know? For we could walk around with blindfolds over our faces for 2 weeks and we would still not have a clue of what it's like to be born blind. I think the real issue for us is how we identify and get to know people who are different from us. And in this scenario, we are the ones who are living in darkness, right? Because we don't understand it, because we've never lived it. We have to be willing to enter it and understand and experience what their light is, because their light is definitely different than our light. In 1952, at my alma mater, Sewanee, which everybody knows I talk about a lot and I love it dearly and it transformed me greatly. In 1952 in Sewanee, all 8 theology professors resigned en masse in protest because, and it was said at the time that it was the best theological staff in the country. They resigned en masse because 4 African Americans had asked to be admitted to the School of Theology, and the University of the South, which School of Theology is part of, did not allow African Americans to be admitted to college. So they took a stand, before and after, then and now, years ago and today. And in 1953, they didn't get any of their professors back, but they admitted 2 African Americans to the School of Theology class. If we are to enter this passage faithfully, we have to realize that we are talking about different worlds, not different ethics. We get hung up on that word sin in John. John is talking about the revelation of God when he talks about sin in John, not causality for doing something that we think is wrong. The text doesn't ask us to enter into an ethical world. It asks us to enter into blindness itself, which is a challenge, which is something we find difficult to do. Have you ever wondered what it might be like to experience the world in a way that never, ever changes? What it would be like to live and move in those experiences where the world is so radically different from our own. Blindness, I'd like you to remember this. Blindness is more about a state of being than a metaphor for unbelief. It's a state of being rather than a metaphor for unbelief. Before we can enter this text, we have to faithfully place ourselves in a world that is radically different from our own. And that's a challenge. And then we must focus on what we can actually describe. The difference between before and after, the then and now, the years ago and today. Notice that the blind man does not describe his conversion in a way that any of the religious authorities find acceptable. All he can say is, all I know is I was blind, but now I see. How do we see and experience that which is our new life, our new light, how we see the world differently? Some of you have probably seen this movie that was very popular just recently called Hidden Figures. This is a story about African American mathematicians who helped get the space program off the ground. And they needed these women. They needed them badly. And so we're talking late 50s, early 60s, and they were put in a room in a basement far, far away on the edge of campus. And there was one of these African-American mathematicians who Kevin Costner's character needed in the control room, in the hub of all activity. And so this one African-American woman comes in and sits in this room of 50 white men. And needless to say, you can imagine, makes a good place for lots of challenges and societal impacts. And the second day she was there, the first impact comes up when she goes to get a cup of coffee. There's only one coffee pot. Next day there were two. Blacks only. And then throughout the movie, we have seen the African-American mathematician have to run 3/4 of a mile across campus to go to the only black bathroom. I think we see her do it 4 or 5 times. And finally, on the 5th time, when she gets back, after sometimes running through the rain, running through the heat, whatever, Kevin Costner is just so upset because he's got all this stress and pressure on him, and he says, "Where in the hell are you always when I need you?" And she tells him her story. In the next scene, we see Kevin Costner walking down a hallway with a sledgehammer. And he takes that sledgehammer and he swings and he swings and he hits and he hits, and he does it for what seems like 5 minutes, which is a really big statement about how hard it is to break down these barriers and enter into the blindness. And finally, the sign of the whites only bathroom comes tumbling down. That's the then and now. That's the before and after. That's entering into the blindness that we are so reluctant to do. And in this passage, I don't know if you noticed, but the Pharisees don't want to hear or even believe the man's story. For the story is not the story they want. For they don't want Jesus to be the hero of the story. They want Jesus to be the sinner in the story. And that's the only way that they can maintain their power. The one that leaves them in control. And don't we, as a world, do that to those that we're blind to? Also, I don't know if you noticed, but almost everybody in this story fails the blind man. Especially the family. Family can't even enjoy the joy of their son getting sight. For they're so concerned about what this religious establishment Pharisees will do to them. In this story, the family fails, the community fails, the religious establishment fails. And the only people who don't fail is the man born blind and Jesus. Light and light. So we must let our descriptions of the before and after, the then and now, be what we remember and what we share. Once I saw the world like this, now I see it like this. Once I believed this, now I believe that. Once I lived in a place that now I see was blind to certain things. Now my eyes are opened, and here is what I see, and that is what the world needs to hear from us. Our stories about the then and now, the before and after, the years ago and today. What we hear from John is often counterintuitive. It just doesn't fit. We're asked to think deeply and think differently. The light of the world is in our midst. and we need not shut our eyes. This is like our aha moment. When we enter into the blindness, we willingly enter into the blindness to understand and to appreciate and to get a better grasp on what everybody around us is experiencing, so that we then can be a brighter light to the world. Amen.